All right, welcome back to the deep dive. Looks like we're going deep on understanding how to better handle stress, especially when it comes to, um, well, difficult people. Let's see, we've got schema therapy, EMDR, depth-oriented brief therapy. Oh, and even some stuff on dealing with narcissists. You guys have been busy.
It's a really interesting mix of sources you've sent in, but there's a theme running through all of them, the impact our early experiences can have, especially on how we react to stress.
Yeah, that's true. And I have to admit, the whole idea that, my childhood could somehow be affecting how I deal with, say, a difficult coworker now, it's kind of mind-blowing.
Well, there's this one example in the schema therapy book that really stuck with me. It's about a guy, Jim, who's having all this anxiety in his relationship, like constantly worried about being abandoned. Turns out, as a kid, he had a lot of instability with his parents. They were in and out of his life. And it seems like that left him with this deep-seated fear of being alone.
Wow. So even as an adult, he's still reacting like he's that kid who's afraid of being left.
Exactly. And that's where this whole schema concept comes in. Think of schemas as, well, I guess you could say mental blueprints, kind of deeply ingrained ones that we develop from those early experiences. They really shape how we see ourselves, the world, even how we interact with others, especially when we're stressed.
So if I'm getting this right, Jim's schema is like, I can't trust people to stick around. They'll always leave.
You got it. And the thing is, these schemas often operate unconsciously, so we might be acting in ways we don't even fully understand, almost on autopilot, reacting in ways that maybe helped us as kids, but aren't so helpful anymore.
So if those are like our default settings, is there a way to change them? Like, how do we even start?
Well, the sources you sent actually offer some pretty powerful techniques for, I guess you could say, rewiring those old patterns. One that really stood out to me is imagery rescripting. It's used in schema therapy and basically helps people rewrite these emotionally charged memories.
Wait, so we're talking about going back in time and changing the past. That sounds a little science fiction-y.
Not exactly changing the past, but more like changing how we experience it emotionally. So you revisit a memory that's linked to a negative schema. But this time, you imagine a different ending, something more positive.
Hmm, okay. So for someone like Jim, would he go back to those memories of his parents leaving and, like, imagine them staying?
It could be something like that, but the key is really focusing on what that younger version of himself needed in those moments. Maybe reassurance, comfort, someone to acknowledge his pain, whatever it was.
Okay, that's pretty powerful stuff. So by providing that younger self with what was missing, you're kind of healing those old wounds and I guess changing the schema too.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is that our brains don't always distinguish between imagined experiences and real ones. So by creating this new positive experience in our minds, we can actually rewire those neural pathways, kind of weaken the grip of that old schema.
Okay, so we're tackling those deeply ingrained schemas. But what about dealing with those tough people in the present? Like shall we say, the narcissist in the room.
Well, one of the books you sent, Disarming the Narcissist, talks about this communication technique called empathic confrontation. It's a way of setting boundaries, but still acknowledging the other person's feelings, even if they seem totally unreasonable.
Okay, that sounds tricky. How do you empathize with someone who, well, maybe doesn't seem to have much empathy themselves?
It's not about agreeing with them or condoning their behavior. It's more about recognizing that they might be coming from a place of insecurity or deep-seated fear.
So let's say a narcissist blames you for their mistake. Instead of getting defensive, you would say something like, I understand you're frustrated, but I need to be clear about my role in this.
That's a great example. By acknowledging their feelings but not getting sucked into the blame game, you shift the power dynamic and assert your own needs.
This makes me think about how important self-awareness is in all of this. If we're not aware of our own schemas and triggers, well, we're more likely to just react in those automatic, maybe not so helpful ways.
Absolutely. And speaking of helpful techniques, another one that's mentioned is creating a safe place in your mind. It's a visualization technique, often used in EMDR therapy.
A safe place. Sounds like a nice escape from, the everyday stress of life.
It can be, but it's actually more than just an escape. It's about intentionally creating feelings of calm, strength, and security, having those resources available when you need them.
So it's like building an internal fortress, to weather those emotional storms.
Exactly. And you can fill your safe place with whatever brings you a sense of peace and comfort. A beach, a forest, a childhood bedroom, anything that feels nurturing and safe.
Okay, I'm liking this idea more and more.
Yeah.
But how does this safe place actually help you, in those high-stress moments?
It's about training your nervous system to tap into those feelings of calm and security, kind of on demand. The more you practice visualizing your safe place, the easier it becomes to access those feelings when you're triggered in real life.
This sounds a bit like mindfulness. Are they related?
They definitely share some similarities. Both mindfulness and these visualization techniques are about cultivating present moment awareness and intentionally shifting your attention.
So instead of getting lost in that emotional chaos, you're creating a space to observe your thoughts and feelings, you know, without judgment.
Exactly. It's about creating that distance between you and your reaction so you have more choice in how you respond.
This is really making me think about how I approach those tough situations. It's not just about pushing through it, it's about creating this inner sanctuary, to access those resources I need.
And the more you practice these techniques, the stronger that inner sanctuary becomes, like a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed and helpless, we can actually train ourselves to respond differently, with more calm and clarity.
Exactly. It's harnessing the power of neuroplasticity to create lasting change.
All right, I'm definitely on board with rewiring my brain for more resilience. But before we get too deep into the neuroscience, let's make sure our listeners are getting some takeaways from this.
Absolutely. What's really important is that these techniques aren't just for therapy sessions. The real magic happens when you start applying these insights to your everyday life.
So how can our listeners actually start using these tools?
Start by becoming more aware. Pay attention to those moments when you're triggered or overwhelmed. What thoughts are coming up? What are you feeling physically? Which schemas might be getting activated?
So if I'm feeling anxious about a presentation at work, I might notice that my perfectionism schema is running the show, right?
Exactly. Once you know what you're dealing with, you can try different techniques. Feeling flooded with anxiety, try accessing your safe place for a few minutes. Struggling to set boundaries with a narcissist, practice empathic confrontation in your mind.
Sounds like having a whole toolbox at your disposal. But what if someone is really struggling? When does it make sense to get professional help?
All of the sources really stress how important the therapeutic relationship is for change.
So finding a therapist who really gets it can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. A therapist can help you uncover those schemas, understand your patterns, and practice these techniques in a safe space. They can also help with any underlying trauma that might be contributing.
It seems like there's a real synergy between these approaches, schema therapy, EMDR, all of them. They all seem to point towards this deeper understanding of how our minds work and how we can heal and create new patterns.
That's a great observation. What's really exciting is that these approaches are constantly evolving, incorporating new research from fields like neuroscience. One of the sources even talked about memory reconsolidation, which is cutting edge stuff.
Memory reconsolidation. Now we're really getting into the sci-fi stuff.
It might sound futuristic, but it's backed by solid research. It refers to how memories can become temporarily unstable when we recall them, and that makes them open to change.
Hold on, you're saying we can actually change our memories?
Not erase them entirely, but research shows that specific interventions during this window when the memory is unstable can really lessen the emotional impact.
So instead of being haunted by the past, we could actually reduce the power of those painful experiences.
That's the potential. And researchers are exploring how to use this in therapy to treat things like PTSD and anxiety disorders. For instance, combining recalling a traumatic memory with a medication like propranolol has shown some promise in reducing the, I guess you could say, the negative effects of those memories.
So it's like we're taking advantage of this window of opportunity when the memory is more flexible to basically, disarm it.
Exactly. It's still early research, but it really opens up some incredible possibilities for healing.
Wow. This whole deep dive has been so insightful. It feels like we've gotten this sneak peek behind the curtain of our own minds.
And what's resonating most with you so far?
It's the idea that we have so much more control over our minds and our reactions than we often realize. We're not just victims of our past or our circumstances. We can heal old wounds, change those negative patterns, and create a whole new way of being.
I love that. What I find so inspiring is that this journey of self-discovery is ongoing. There's always more to learn, more to heal, more to celebrate.
Absolutely. And it's a journey we can take together, supporting and encouraging each other along the way.
I love that. And speaking of the journey ahead, I'd like to leave you with something to ponder.
Oh, I love a good cliffhanger. Lay it on me.
If we accept that much of our behavior is really driven by things we're not even aware of, How can we become more aware of those processes and then actually make conscious choices that, align with our values and our goals?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I need a minute to process that. But we'll be right back to dive even deeper.
Yeah, that's a question that really makes you think. How do we become more conscious of, those forces that are shaping our reactions?
It's definitely got me thinking, too. I mean, if we're talking about these unconscious patterns driving so much of our behavior, how do we even begin to, like, take control?
Well, one of the books, Unlocking the Emotional Brain, it talks about a process called emotional coherence. It's all about understanding, the purpose behind our emotions.
Emotional coherence. So is that like not letting my anxiety go crazy when my boss throws a last-minute deadline at me?
It's not so much about suppressing those emotions, but more about understanding that even those difficult feelings are there for a reason. They often stem from, you know, those deeply held beliefs we form early on. Beliefs that maybe helped us back then, but might not be doing us any favors now.
So kind of like that perfectionism schema we were talking about earlier. Maybe as a kid, it got me all the gold stars in school, but now it just makes me a total wreck every time I have to present a project.
Exactly. And unlocking the emotional brain suggests that we can use things like memory reconsolidation and imagery rescripting to actually shift those outdated patterns.
So instead of trying to like think positive or just ignore those feelings, we're actually changing I guess, the emotional learning underneath it all.
Precisely. One of the sources even mentioned this guy, Bruce Ecker, and his approach called coherence therapy. It really zeroes in on these emotional learnings that drive those problem behaviors.
Coherence therapy. So it's like therapy for my emotions to get their act together.
You could say that. It's about bringing those hidden beliefs into the light, becoming aware of them, and then finding experiences that contradict and transform them using, like we talked about, the power of memory reconsolidation.
Okay, so how does memory reconsolidation actually work in changing those really deep-seated patterns?
Well, it involves a few key steps. First, you activate that target memory, really bring it to mind vividly. Maybe you talk about a specific event, visualize a scene, or just notice those sensations that come up when you're triggered.
So someone who's always been afraid to speak their mind, they might revisit a memory of being shut down as a kid.
Exactly. By bringing that memory into awareness, they're essentially opening up that reconsolidation window, making it malleable. And the next step is crucial, introducing contradictory knowledge.
Contradictory knowledge. Does that mean like trying to convince yourself the opposite is true?
Not quite convincing yourself, but more like finding an experience or a piece of knowledge that just rings undeniably true for you, something that directly challenges that old learning. It could be from a supportive relationship, a personal victory, even a new way of looking at past events.
So for someone who's always felt unsafe speaking up, a contradictory experience might be having a therapist who really listens and validates their feelings.
That's a perfect example. And by experiencing that deep validation, they're essentially creating a new emotional learning that contradicts the old one. And through memory reconsolidation, that new learning starts to rewrite the old pattern.
Wow, so it's like we're constantly updating our emotional software, huh?
Yeah.
With each new experience we have.
Yeah.
But that makes the whole therapeutic relationship sound even more important, right? It's not just about getting advice, it's about creating those spaces for those transformative experiences to even happen.
Absolutely. One of the books you sent, the listening book, really dives into the power of empathic listening in facilitating change. It highlights certain things it calls connectors and disconnectors in communication. They can either, support or hinder this whole process.
Connectors and disconnectors. Okay, that sounds like a cheat sheet I could really use for, well, pretty much every conversation.
Think of connectors as ways of communicating that build safety, validation, understanding. Active listening, reflecting back what you're hearing, asking those open-ended questions, acknowledging someone's experience without judging it, those are all connectors.
And disconnectors would be the opposite then, right? Like interrupting, giving advice when no one asked for it, dismissing someone's feelings, or just turning the conversation back to yourself.
Yes, exactly. And the listening book really emphasizes how even those subtle disconnectors can trigger those old emotional learnings, making it so much harder to be vulnerable and open to new experiences.
This is making me think about my own communication in, well, pretty much every area of my life, not just therapy.
It really is a powerful shift in perspective. The quality of our communication can either help or hurt our own emotional growth. By being mindful of those connectors and disconnectors, we can create those more supportive, healing interactions everywhere we go.
This deep dive has been Incredible. It's like we've been given this decoder ring for, like, the emotional brain.
And we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore.
Okay, before we wander too far down the neural pathways, let's bring it back to some practical steps our listeners can take.
Great idea. First and foremost, just be curious about your own emotional world. Pay attention when you're feeling triggered or overwhelmed. What's happening in your body? What thoughts and feelings are swirling around in there? What schemas might be activated?
So it all comes back to that self-awareness we were talking about.
Exactly. And as you become more aware of your own patterns, you can start experimenting with those techniques we've been discussing. Create that safe place and spend some time there each day. Try some imagery rescripting with a memory that's been bothering you. Notice those connectors and disconnectors in your conversations and, intentionally try to use more connectors.
Those are some great starting points. And of course, if someone's really struggling, they can always reach out to a therapist trained in these approaches, right?
Absolutely. A therapist can provide guidance and support, that safe space to explore these concepts. And remember, healing and transformation, it's a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, celebrate those victories, and keep diving deep.
Beautifully said. Now, there's one more really interesting concept from the sources that I want to explore. Early bonding rules. That phrase really jumped out at me from the EMDR and attachment-focused trauma therapy book.
Ah, yes, early bonding rules. They're basically like those unspoken guidelines we develop as kids about, well, how to get our needs met in relationships.
So kind of like a survival guide for navigating those early relationships.
Exactly. As kids, we're constantly watching and adapting to how our families work. We learn what behaviors get rewarded, what gets punished, what we need to do to get attention, affection, even just basic care.
So if a child's emotional needs are constantly ignored, they might come up with a rule like, don't express your feelings, it'll just push people away.
That's a great example. Or a kid growing up with a super critical parent might learn, I have to be perfect to be loved. These rules become so deeply ingrained, and often we're not even aware of them.
And I imagine these early bonding rules don't always translate so well to our adult relationships.
That's the thing. What might have been a necessary adaptation in childhood can become a real obstacle later on. Those same rules that helped us survive those difficult family dynamics can lead us to recreate those dynamics in our romantic relationships, friendships, even at work.
So someone with the rule, don't express your feelings, they might find themselves shutting down emotionally in their relationships, struggling to really connect with their partner.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that to break free from these patterns, we have to become aware of those early bonding rules. We have to look at those underlying beliefs about relationships that are driving our behavior.
That makes sense. But how do we even uncover those hidden rules if they're unspoken?
It takes some detective work. Start by paying attention to those recurring patterns in your relationships. When do you feel triggered, reactive, stuck? Ask yourself, what's the fear or belief that's driving this? What am I trying to prevent?
So if I'm always people-pleasing, putting everyone else's needs before my own, I might discover a rule like I have to be agreeable to be liked.
Precisely. And once you've figured out what that rule is, you can challenge it. Is it still working for you? Is it based in truth or on, outdated adaptations from childhood? What would it look like to relate from a more authentic, empowered place?
This is so powerful. It's like we're taking back our power to rewrite those old scripts and create healthier relationship patterns.
And the sources actually give some guidance on how to do this. They suggest creating a whole new set of healthy relationship rules, ideally with the help of a therapist.
So we're not just ditching the old rules and going in blind. We're actually making a conscious, intentional plan for how we want to relate to people.
Exactly. And these new rules should be based on your values, your needs, your vision for healthy relationships.
I love that. It's like designing a whole new operating system for our relationships, one built on respect, mutuality, and authenticity.
And the book emphasizes approaching this whole process with compassion for those younger parts of ourselves who created those early bonding rules. They were just doing their best to survive tough situations.
That's such an important reminder. We're not beating ourselves up for those old patterns. We're acknowledging that they were once necessary, and now it's time to upgrade.
And as you try out these new rules, be patient. It takes time and practice to rewire those deeply ingrained patterns.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. It's amazing how all these concepts, schemas, memory reconsolidation, early bonding rules, they all fit together to paint this intricate picture of how our minds work and how we can create change.
And what I find so inspiring is that it empowers us to go beyond just managing symptoms and into, real healing and transformation.
Exactly. It's not just about feeling better. It's about becoming more whole, more aligned with our true selves.
And that journey of becoming is something we can all support each other in. By sharing our experiences, our insights, our compassion, we create this ripple effect of healing and growth.
Beautifully said. And that feels like the perfect place to wrap things up.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep embracing the power of your own mind.
It's amazing how much those early experiences can stick with us, especially when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, it really is. Like we're walking around with these, I don't know, invisible rule books that kind of dictate how we connect with people.
Right. And if those rules are, say, based on being afraid of being abandoned or, needing to please everyone all the time, it's no wonder things get so messy in our adult relationships. So how do we actually go about changing those early bonding rules? Is it as simple as just deciding we want new ones?
Well, not quite that simple, but you're on the right track. One of the books suggested actually working with a therapist to create a new set of, conscious guidelines for your relationships.
Ah, okay. So instead of letting those old unconscious rules run the show,
Yeah.
we're bringing them out into the open and making like intentional choices about how we want to do relationships.
Exactly. It's about really looking at those specific rules that aren't serving you anymore and then coming up with, healthier ones that are more in line with who you are now.
I see. So let's say my old rule was, don't ever express your needs, you'll just be a burden. A new rule could be something like, it's okay to ask for what I need in a relationship.
Yeah, perfect example.
Yeah.
It's about moving away from that fear and self-doubt and toward a place of self-respect and feeling worthy.
I'm realizing now how all these techniques we've talked about, the schemas, the memory reconsolidation, even these early bonding rules, they all kind of point towards this deeper understanding of ourselves
Yeah.
and, the power we actually have to create change.
It's like we're peeling back all those layers of conditioning, all that stuff we've picked up along the way to uncover this, true resilient self underneath it all.
And the more we understand those patterns, those, I guess you could say, default settings, the better we can handle those tough situations, with more clarity and confidence.
For sure. It's about moving from just reacting to actually responding, from feeling stuck to feeling empowered.
This whole deep dive has been such an eye-opener. I feel like I've got this whole new toolkit for navigating my inner world and, all those relationships in my life.
That's great to hear. And, it doesn't stop here. These sources really emphasize that personal growth is an ongoing thing.
Oh, absolutely. There's always more to learn, more to heal, more to appreciate,
Ugh.
right?
Exactly. And the more we embrace that journey of self-discovery, the richer and more meaningful our lives become.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. Well, for everyone listening, keep diving deep, keep exploring those inner workings, and, never stop believing in your own ability to grow and change.
Yeah, remember, you have the power within you to rewrite your story, to create a life that really reflects who you are and what matters most to you.